Next, from the state capitol, we get the reaction from lawmakers to the governor's budget address. We begin by hearing from the Republican leaders in the House and Senate, Representative Jim Durkin and Senator Christine Radogno. We'll then hear from Democratic Senator Andy Manar. This runs about 15 minutes.
Glad to have this opportunity just to make a few comments about the governor's address, but it's clearly an election year, and it's the type of rhetoric we hear every 3.5 years. I'm disappointed that the most important and the most significant tragedy in the state of Illinois is our rising unemployment. There was nothing stated today in this address that will do anything to reduce unemployment in Illinois. I would have hoped to have heard something on how we can do that, how we can turn that tide, other than we are going to tax. I don't believe that we can tax our way to prosperity. The other side of the aisle believes otherwise, but I think I stand in with a great majority of Illinoisans who don't believe that we should be taxing them anymore.
Yeah, and my initial reaction was it was an extraordinarily vague speech for a budget speech, clearly a political speech. It's interesting that the governor wants to focus 5 years in the future and hopefully have people forget about the past 5 years. It is incredible to me that any taxpayer would believe that the next 5 years will be any different after they've already spent an extra $26 billion in state taxes, and they really haven't gotten much value for it. I don't know why they believe things should be any different with the same leadership in the state.
The Democrats 3.5 years ago, from the top of the Capitol building, screamed that we have to pay the bills, and that's why we are going to have to pass this temporary tax increase. They lied. It didn't happen. None of the bills were paid. We're still $5.5 to $6 billion behind in paying state vendors. They cannot be trusted anymore with the taxpayers' money.
Guys, if you don't extend the tax, what do you cut? That is the question.
We agreed on a revenue number which is responsible, and it takes into account the expiration of the tax increase, and that's where our appropriation committees are meeting right now to find the appropriate balance for what's necessary within state government. I will tell you this, there was some mention of Medicaid. We were on a great path to reduce probably a $7 billion, I think $13 billion program in Illinois, which is our Medicaid program. And the Democrats stopped our ability to kick off people who are ineligible. They are not willing to take on the meaningful reforms that are necessary to reduce the excesses within state government. That's just one example. But the fact is, that's why we have appropriation committees. We've agreed on a number. We think it's responsible, and we would like to live within that number.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that the Democrats will tend to look for the worst-case scenario. We heard a lot of pretty dramatic language today about savage cuts and extremism. First of all, that's an old playbook. We've heard that a number of times. The governor has said time and time again, we're going to have all these cuts. They don't have to happen. There's significant wiggle room built into the numbers that they are portraying. So don't buy into the fact that their numbers, that there has to be $2.3 billion in cuts, is accurate.
Now, can you stand there and say that if this income tax increase is not extended, that education would not be cut in Illinois?
It does not have to be cut.
So, responding to his sort of political campaign slogan toward the end there, where he says, the truth is, we're telling you the truth, we're telling you that Illinois can tax less, spend less, and expect to fund education. We're simply not telling you the truth. Seems to be a direct slap at his Republican opponent. And what are you saying?
Well, I say it's ironic that he's talking about telling the truth. Remember, this is the guy that said we're going to solve the problems with the 2% income tax that he supported, and that was after he said he would not sign anything above 1%. So if we're looking for truth tellers, I think we need to look elsewhere.
So that makes the governor a liar? Is the governor a liar?
Democrats who run this building do not tell the truth about taxes and spending.
I agree.
Not that you're here to support or not support Mr. Rauner, but he's calling for drastic cuts in spending as well that the governor and others think would hurt education so adversely that you'd never recover.
We've increased spending over the last 10 years almost by $1 billion every year. So I'm tired of the Democrats complaining about the fact that we have a revenue problem in Illinois. It's just not the case. During the Great Recession, we still had additional revenues coming into the state of Illinois General Revenue Fund.
And the other thing that I think the other candidate is talking about is innovation in education. Taxpayers need more value for their dollar. We've dumped lots and lots, billions and billions of dollars into the same old tired systems, and we're not getting anywhere. We can do things better. This governor talked about the fact that we have fewer state employees. That's true, but what he didn't tell you is that overtime costs have exploded. It's not because we've done anything better. They've just shifted it around. That's not honest.
The class warfare rhetoric and also the proposals they've put over the past week, which they've released, is not going to do anything about the unemployment in Illinois. Not one thing about it. And to me, that's what should be the focus of today's speech and also for the balance of the session.
And it was
What
only-
about the governor's contention that he cut spending by $5.7 billion?
I'd like to see where that happened.
Yeah, remember, you can finagle these figures. Actually, the spending between last year and this year is up $1.3 billion. So we'll be happy to get you those statistics. But just one other point about the state's jobs climate. Remember, not to repeat the bad stuff, but we are last in unemployment. We have the highest out-migration. People are leaving the state in droves. Continuing to increase their taxes while they're not getting value for that money will only exacerbate that problem.
So when the governor says we've turned the corner, we're on the road to recovery, as he did, what do you say?
Not by taxing, not by extending out the tax increase that was, which people in Illinois were misled on, and also not by the Speaker's proposal and also what the Senate's doing with the graduated tax. That is going to ensure that there will be no tax base left in the state of Illinois, and families will say enough's enough.
Do you feel we've turned the corner and we're on the
No.
road to recovery?
No.
No. I think
Absolutely
we've made some
not.
progress with the pension bill, but the fact is we still have not turned the corner because spending is still, it's outpacing the revenues that are coming in every year.
Well, this was just a speech. Just like the state of the state, it carries the full force and effect of, somebody's grocery list. So what is the final budget that everybody votes on and gives the governor going to look like?
Well, that'll be the discussion over the next few weeks. We actually should have had another 6 weeks to do that, but as you know, the governor chose not to give his budget address until after the primary.
But everything he said is going to have to be put into a bill, voted on, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering what's going to be in that bill.
Well, you'd have to ask the Speaker and the President. They're the ones who run the chambers and who micromanage the appropriation process. We'll sit with them and discuss how this is going to move forward, but, I'm waiting to hear from them.
So are
Do
you
you have a
standing here?
reaction to the proposal to cut property taxes by $500 since that's actually a local tax?
I don't know who's going to be jumping for joy for that. That's about 2 weeks of groceries for a middle-income
Well,
family.
first off, it's not a cut, because remember what he's doing is you get an income tax credit. So what people need to remember at the end of the day, it's still a tax increase. Your income tax is going to go up from where it should have been come January 1st, and then he's going to substitute the current property tax adjustment for a new one. So this is not a boon for anyone.
So are you standing here saying that this was a campaign speech, not a budget speech?
Of course. It's
think you
political
got that
season,
too.
and I think it's no secret why the budget speech was pushed back till the end of March to see who was going to win the primary. It was geared towards our nominee. But
And
again,
where is he? How come he's not here? I mean, he's your nominee.
sure.
How come he's not around to give his idea?
Did you ask him?
Yeah, call him up.
Yeah, good idea.
Thank you.
Sen Andy Manar, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And as we come out of the governor's budget address, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think as the governor did in January, I gave us an honest look at where we have been in recent years in the state and where we are today, and he provided us a 5-year framework moving forward. I think that's a good thing. We clearly have made progress. We've cut the number of unpaid bills in state government in half. We've identified $3 billion in savings to Medicaid. There's no new borrowing on the table, and there's a proposal to make, again, the full pension payment. In recent years, those things were not discussed, and those are bedrock principles today, and I think we should acknowledge that up front. But at the same time, I agree that we have a long way to go, and we should start to tackle some of our large problems this coming session, and today was the first step for that.
How much of an appetite is there, do you think, in the legislature? You're in the Senate, of course, but for cutting back on some programs even if the tax increase that's supposed to go off in January were extended, how much of an appetite is there to cut current spending levels?
I think, in concept, I think that we are always looking for ways to make the budget more efficient. In reality, I think that we've done just about all that we can do. We can clearly always look for wasteful spending. We can look for better ways to spend money, for example, with school funding, which I've worked on for the past year since I was sworn in. But we have to have a broader conversation about our spending habits in the state and what size of state government we want moving forward and how we're going to pay for it. I mean, that's the ultimate question, and again, today is the first day.
Let's talk just a bit about, because you've had hearings around the state on education. What are some of the salient points? I'm sure we could talk for hours on this, but what are some of the headline issues that came out from those hearings?
Well, I approach this as a parent and as a legislator, as a parent of 3 children in a very small school district in Bunker Hill in southern Macoupin County. I think our plight as a local district is indicative of too many across the state. The governor's proposal today calls for increasing spending to public education, which is a good thing. We have to, at the same time, though, we have to drill down deeper and get into the details of how we distribute the almost $5 billion in the state budget for general state aid. We distribute money today based on a state that existed in 1997, and we're sending money to the 860 plus school districts based on problems that existed many years ago, not based on the problems that we face today. So I'm of the firm belief, because we've exposed this over the past 12 months, that we can spend our money differently and better to address inequity in the state that has never been worse than it is today.
Before we let you go, let's just throw it forward a bit. You're going to have some hearings on a bad topic, heroin use up in Illinois. We'd love to be covering more of that issue with you, but just a little bit of what you can, to why you're going to be looking at this.
Yeah, this came to me from Representative Yingling, who represents a district in Lake County. Last session, we were having a conversation about the growing heroin epidemic, which is, I think, an appropriate word for the challenge that we face. And through that conversation, and through the conversations I had with local state's attorneys in the district that I represent, this is a problem that has become all too common in rural counties as well as in urban parts of Illinois. It's hard to talk about this because we have to first admit that we have a problem that we have to deal with. But the statistics regarding the use and the prevalence of heroin in rural communities and in urban parts of the state are staggering. That calls for a strategy on the part of state government, with the public health department, with law enforcement, with educators, so that we have early detection. Because the statistics are just, I would say they're an awful snapshot of where today. We should approach this like we did the meth issue several years ago. There was an aggressive approach to it, a statewide approach, and I think that would serve us well dealing with the heroin epidemic today in the state.
And not editorializing, but I would just point out, any time we confront these things, it involves, there's a cost factor, whether it's public health or law enforcement or whatever. I mean, so when we talk about state spending, there's all kinds of elements to that spending.
Yeah, there certainly is. But with this challenge in particular, we could save a lot of money in our school system, in our criminal justice system, in our state's attorney's offices, for example, where more and more of their time and resources are spent on very expensive cases dealing with heroin use and heroin sale and distribution. We could do a lot of good by simply identifying issues early, educating teenagers on the dangers of this, the high addictive nature of the drug. Those are the types of things that we hope to put together with our task force hearings across the state.
All right, Sen Andy Manar, thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.